Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Before we start, I want to thank the sponsors of this year, the Miss Moed Cohen and her husband. This year sponsored in memory of Mali Moed, grandmother of Leora Cohen, who graduated in 2006, and a former student of mine who I remember very fondly, Ariella Cohen. Again, Mr. Hill and Mrs. Linda Moed Cohen. I did not know Mrs. Mali Moed personally, but if the sensitivity of her daughter as a nurse and the sweetness of her granddaughter as a student is any indication, then I'm sure she was a very special person. So we thank you very much for your sponsorship. We appreciate that. We're going to start with a topic that I stumbled upon because I was curious about it. There was no epiphany moment. It's something I've been thinking about for a while, about making deals with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. If one does a mitzvah conditionally, Hashem, I will, clean, get rid of all the chametz in my house this year, but you have to get rid of my chametz in Shemayim, right? I'll do the extra mile for you, do the extra mile for me. I'll keep Shabbos, I'll do this mitzvah, but it's going to come at a price, Hashem. I want you to do something in return. Is there any violation of that? But before we begin this topic, and it's a fascinating topic, much of which we're not going to have a chance to really see in depth today, but just get a glance and perhaps maybe highlight a message or two that can perhaps be meaningful to us during the Yom Noraim, the Yom Noraim season, the Yisar Simei Tshuva that we're in now. Before we do that, I want to just start with a quick story. There was a bunch of Hasidim who were once sitting around. Hasidim always sit around. I'm assuming they had jobs, but they're always sitting around in a bar or an inn or something. So the bunch of Hasidim that were sitting around in a bar, and they begin to talk. They're all from different Rabbeim. They all have different customs, different communities, and they all begin to share mofsim, miracles that the various Rabbeim performed. Miracles. And one chassid after another is going through his mofes, and another chassid is going after his mofes.
The second session is starting now. The second session should start now. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
So the chassidim are all sharing about different mofs and different miracles that the Rebbe performed. And there's one chassid who's sitting there noticeably very quiet, really not sharing anything at all. He's quiet. And the other Hasidim say, do you have a mofes? Do you have a miracle to share? Did your Rebbe do a miracle? Because a Rebbe who doesn't do a miracle is like someone who wants to become a saint, but they fell short on the miracle, right? You can't be canonized as a saint unless you've done a miracle. You can't be a Rebbe unless someone actually witnessed you doing a miracle. So this guy's reluctant. He says, no. And finally they nudge him, and he says, okay, I'll share your mofes. They said, once, there was a time I had an opportunity to invest a very minimal amount of money into a business proposition with the promise of great returns, small investment, great returns. And it was a minimal risk, but it was a risk nonetheless, so I decided I would ask my Rebbe if such a thing were permissible. So I went to my Rebbe, and I asked my Rebbe, is it permissible for me to be involved, to be engaged in this business transaction, this venture? Is it too risky for me? And my Rebbe said, don't invest the money. And he stops. They say, what's their story? He said, well, someone else invested instead of me, the person who asked me to be a partner or friend, another partner, and he invested, and they became fabulously wealthy. What's the miracle, they all said? He said, I lost out on a tremendous amount of wealth. He said, so where's the mofes? He said, the miracle is that despite that, I'm still a chassid of the Rebbe. That's the miracle. That despite his bad advice, I'm still a believer. And the truth is that we can ask the same question about our relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. We anticipate a lot in return, sometimes too much, and sometimes it's actually very reasonable we expect in return. Is there validity to tying our belief and faith in the Kadosh Baruch Hu and God in the fact that He will give back in return? Is there anything wrong with that? If after all we assume that Hashem runs the show, and He communicates to us through His Torah and His mitzvot, so why is it wrong, or is it wrong at all for me to expect a little bit something in return? And can I make that a condition on my mitzvot? And if I do, am I in violation of an Isser? Is it my mitzvah count? Does it not count? Is it praiseworthy, not praiseworthy? This is something which I'm sure we've all thought about at one point or another. So, to begin, I want to start with a question that was asked of the Shut Mayim Chaim. The Shut Mayim Chaim was a Rav. He took over as the chief rabbi he took over as chief rabbi for Rabbi Yosef in Tel Aviv when he became chief rabbi in the 1970s, and he was a great posek student from the yeshiva of Parat Yosef in Yerushalayim, and he was asked the following question. He said, "B'cheverteinu yesh adam dati ma'od." We have a very frum friend in our chevra. Aval kol pam she'osa mitzvah. It's not in your sheet. You're not missing anything. Every time this guy does a mitzvah, I'm doing this mitzvah so that it should be a benefit for me and my family. He lights a menorah, Hashem, do something back for me. Hashem, I'm giving tzedakah, a little bit in return. Hashem, I'm cutting the challah, some mazonos, please. Every mitzvah he does on condition. He stays Hashem. So the friends are very concerned. They're concerned. We tell him shezeh aser. This is how the question is asked. Shu osa mitzvah lo l'shem shemayim, but he's not doing the mitzvah l'shem shemayim for the right purposes. That's our take. Na lahaspir lanu ma ha'emes b'vikuach zeh. Tell us who is right in this argument. First of all, we should all have arguments like this. We should all fight with our friends about whether or not we're doing mitzvahs l'shem shemayim or not. But the Shut Be'er Mayim Chaim was asked, not that long ago, this Shuvah from 1990, he was asked, is there a violation? Should we tell our friend to stop doing this? Stop saying things like that to Hashem. Don't talk that way to him. So, but we could even make this our own case, right? Let's give a different case. Like we said before, Hashem said, you say now, this is the time of year to ask Hashem for things. Hashem, I need a good year. I need money, I need health, I need wealth, I need all the things that a person needs to survive and to be successful. I'll do mitzvah X, Y, mitzvah Z, any mitzvah I've done before. Maybe I'll take on a new mitzvah, but I want to do it with something in return. So again, does that mitzvah count? Does that work? Is he in violation of an Isra? So the first source we're going to look at is the Gemara in Pesachim. Very interesting Gemara in Pesachim. It's actually also a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah and a Gemara in Bava Basra. The Gemara says, not to give anyone palpitations, we're in the process of wanting to build our sukkahs, but this is a Gemara about cleaning for chametz. Okay? We're not there yet. No. We're not there yet. It's not a shir for Shabbos Agadol, it's just for Shabbos Shuvah. But we want to know, is someone allowed to search for chametz in a dangerous place? That's what the Gemara wants to know. So the Gemara says, yes, shluchei mitzvah ein nizakin, that if someone searches for chametz, he's not going to be harmed. But then the Gemara says, shema tava lo machat, second line, v'asi li'unei basra. How do we know that when he's checking for chametz, he didn't also drop a needle? Back in the day, needles used to be expensive, and people used to actually look for them when they dropped them. Didn't just sweep the floor and hope that they picked it up. So he wants to know, maybe while he's doing the mitzvah, he has an ulterior motive in mind, and he's looking for a needle on the floor. Is that okay? So the Gemara says, in that case, he's not doing a mitzvah. He's looking for chametz, but there are sometimes his eyes being averted to look for his needle. Could we assume that a person won't be harmed, if he's searching in a dangerous place, even though he's doing a mitzvah, but he also has ulterior motives to look for his dropped needle? So Bahatani says the Gemara, this is true, because don't we have a brisa that tells us, it's bolded in the Gemara in Pesachim, source 1, Ha'omer selazul tzedakah b'shil sheyichya b'ni o she'eya ben olam haba harezet tzadik gamor. If someone says, I'm going to give tzedakah in order that my son, right, be healed, that he live, or that I become a ben olam haba, I'm guaranteed a portion of the world to come, then I'm a tzadik gamor. The Gemara says that person is a tzaddik gamor. So the Gemara says, that's true. The only problem is basar the badak asilune basra. We have to be concerned that after you find the chametz, that once you've done with the chametz, the mitzvah, and you look for the needle, so then the protection doesn't work anymore. But the Gemara says that if you're looking for a needle and chametz at the same time, that's called as if you're doing the mitzvah fully, even though you have other intentions. How do we know this? Because someone who gives tzedakah on condition that their child be healed, they can become a ben olam haba, is a tzaddik gamor, says the Gemara. Now, there's many questions we can ask on this Gemara. We have a lot of discussion just on these lines alone. But I want to ask two fundamental questions. Number one is this just apply to tzedakah? Right? The Gemara is talking about tzedakah. What about other mitzvos? What about if it's not sheyichya b'ni? What about if I want to become rich? Right? I'm giving tzedakah on condition that I become rich. Does that work? Or is it only if for these two things, which seem very praiseworthy, right? Whereas other things might be less praiseworthy. How about other mitzvahs? Does this apply to every mitzvah in the Torah or just the tzedakah? But I want to focus primarily on the words tzaddik gamor. He is a fully righteous person if he does mitzvos for his own benefit. And the Gemara says, doesn't say that it's okay. The Gemara says, harezet tzaddik gamor. You're eight. How many of us, right? We talked about it on Rosh Hashanah. We wish people a greeting, right? Right? You should be nechtav b'sifrei tzaddikim. But we all know that, right? We have to work on it. We need 10 days to get to that level, right? If we're lucky, right? But this person's a tzaddik gamor. So when the Gemara says that he's a tzaddik gamor, there's two ways to understand it. I want to ask you which one you think is correct. Does it mean that he's done the mitzvah like a pro, and when it comes to the mitzvah of tzedakah, he's done it like a tzaddik gamor, and for this mitzvah alone, he's a tzaddik gamor? Is that what the Gemara means? Or does the Gemara mean that this attitude, The attitude of doing mitzvos on condition, even if you plan on getting a benefit, makes one into a tzaddik gamor. What do you think? You hear the distinction? Is it that this mitzvah is done as if you're a tzaddik gamor? You know, you are a tzaddik by this mitzvah because Iyun lishma. When it comes to tzedakah, you're okay. Or do we say this person's attitude makes him into a tzaddik gamor? Anyone want us to make a suggestion? Can't go wrong. Yeah.
I think it's his attitude because he realizes that he maybe is not doing enough, and he's looking into himself about why this happened. He's just not saying. So he's trying to change.
Oh, very good.
Something for the better, so it could make him a better.
That's really excellent, right? So maybe it's the attitude, maybe the fact that a person realizes that Hashem pays attention, that every mitzvah we do has accountability. Excellent, makes sense. Yes, very good, excellent. What do you think?
I once heard that the mitzvah of tzedakah have a really special, it's one of the only mitzvot that it's not about intention. It's
right.
Because it's such an important mitzvah. It doesn't matter why you're doing it for what reason.
Oh, good. So we're going to get there and see if tzedakah perhaps is different. Yes.
It doesn't make a tnai. It just make a request.
Right.
So that makes him, he doesn't say, Kochi rotzem yadi asali, you request.
He's just saying
that you are not doing it yourself. There is
right.
someone above that does things for you. So that's
right.
why maybe it's a digamut.
It's a very important point. He's not making a condition. He's just making the statement. He's like, people put plaques, this classroom is dedicated. He's a person puts a plaque in every corner they put in tzedakah. They write their name on it, right? This is in Lulei Nishmas or L'Schus Refuah Shalem. All right, what's wrong with that? Very good. So as you can imagine, it's a machlokes rishonim. And we're not going to go through the entire rishonim, but if you look now at Rashi and Tosafot underneath the Gemara, Rashi says, Harezet tzaddik gamor b'davar zeh. That for this mitzvah tzaddik gamor, if you want to know, did he perform this mitzvah properly? He's a pro when it comes to this mitzvah. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm giving my father a source sheet. I forgot to thank my parents for coming, and my grandmother for coming from Baltimore. She came here. She's literally taking a train right back after this. She came just for this year. Nothing to do with Yom Tov coming up, but we thank you very much. I'm sorry about that. So Rashi says b'davar zeh for this matter, but Tosfos says something different. He says as follows. Look at Tosfos. It's the second source under the Gemara. He says, but first he asks a question. He says, V'hatnan, don't we have a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos? Al tiyu ka'avadim hamisham shemesarav al manasakabel pras. Don't we have a Mishnah that tells us you can't do mitzvos on condition that you receive a reward? So he says, how does the Gemara say that this person's a tzaddik gamor when there's a beferish Mishnah that says that a person does mitzvos on condition to get a reward? Right? It's not advisable. Al tihiyu, says the Mishnah. Don't be like those who do things for rewards. She'im lo tavo. So what has Tosfos answer? He says, B'chi hai gavna. In this situation, the Mishnah is talking about She'im lo tavo lo osa tova shumitzape toa mischaret al tzedakah. When the Mishnah says, don't be a person who does mitzvos on condition, it means don't regret it, don't resent it afterwards. Aval mi she'eno toa mischaret. But as long as you do the mitzvah without charata, without regret, you give the mitzvah, right, lo aleinu, God forbid, for the health of a child, and it doesn't work out that way. As long as you don't regret having made the check out to tzedakah, then you're okay. Harezet tzaddik gamor. That sounds simple enough, right? So according to Rashi, he's a tzaddik gamor for this mitzvah. According to Tosfos, the attitude is okay. It's an okay attitude to do things conditionally. When the Mishnah says, don't be like a servant who does things conditionally, we know what that's talking about, someone who regrets it afterwards. And we have a problem with Tosfos. Is there a difficulty with Tosfos? That's a tzaddik gamor, someone who just doesn't resent it afterwards, makes you a tzaddik gamor, according to us, makes you a fully righteous person, and your attitude towards avodas Hashem is laudatory and praiseworthy? Right? If we read Tosfos correctly, what's the problem with Tosfos? Anybody want to say? You want to suggest? Well, let's look for a second. Source number 2. A well-known Mishnah. The Mishnah says in source number 2, Mishnah Avos, Antigonus ish socho kibo mishimon atzadik hu haya omer, he would used to say the following all the time. Source number 2, Al tiyu kavod masham shesrav al manas kavod pras. We just read it. Don't be like a servant who does things conditionally for rewards, for prizes. Rather, you should do things shalom manas kavod pras, even if you don't anticipate a reward. Do them anyhow. V'yamoreh shamayim aleichem, and the fear of heaven should be upon you. Why? Look what Rashi says. We're not going to go through the whole Rashi, just the first part of Rashi. Elo avud me'ahava. You have to love us. You have to do avodas Hashem with love, says Rashi. If you do things conditionally, there's no love for Hashem in that mitzvah. You're doing it for an ulterior motive. Turn the page. What does the Rambam say? Again, we're just going to highlight a few words. Rambam, turn the page, top of the next page, Perish Mishnah LaRambam, Ella Abdu Ka'avadim She'ena Makavim L'Chesed, V'lo Lahatava. Don't do mitzvahs because you think you'll get anything in return. Do mitzvahs with a clean mind, with nothing but the kavanah for the mitzvah. When you light that menorah, have in mind that you're lighting a menorah. When you eat that matzah, have in mind you're eating that matzah. When you hear the shofar, think nothing about anything except for the shofar. You should do it simply. You should do things for Hashem out of love. And the Perish Ben Yonah says the same thing. The third source under the Gemara, Perish Ben Yonah, it's not a complete service of Hashem. That if you're not doing it for your master, you're doing it for the reward. I'm not doing it for my parent because they asked me to do it. I'm asking it because I want to get the candy afterwards. That's what it's like. And he even says in the next paragraph that you know what this is? The mitzvah of ahavta es Hashem Elokecha. If you do mitzvahs because you don't anticipate a reward, but you do them out of love for Hashem, he says that's fulfilling the Torah decree in Devarim of ahavta es Hashem Elokecha. And if you don't, you are not fulfilling the mitzvah of ahavta Hashem Elokecha. What's our problem with Tosfos? Tosfos seems to think simply not regretting it makes you a tzaddik gamor. Is Tosfos not aware of the fact that we should try to do things for ahavas Hashem? The Mishnah is talking, he takes the Mishnah out of context. The Mishnah talks about doing things out of love for Hashem. What happened to love for Hashem? What happened to Tosfos' understanding that we should do things not for prizes, but out of a desire to serve Hashem? And that doesn't even make its way into his lexicon. Rashi makes a lot more sense. Because Rashi says he's not a tzaddik gomer for everything. For this mitzvah, it works fine. Maybe tzedakah is an exception. So what a quick answer for Tosfos. Yes?
Well, I feel like, Tosfos was almost saying that if you were to afterwards, then it was as though you were like being conditional in the first place. Like,
right.
You were more like saying, I'll do this if you first do this for me. Like, oh.
But that's correct. So you're right. That's important. He says if you make it conditional, then it's clear what your actions and intentions were originally, right? But a person can still say, I'm giving this tzedakah, Amanashia ben olam haba, and not do it out of love for Hashem, and not be resentful for it. But it doesn't mean that his kavanah initially was a positive kavanah. He might have changed his mind and said, you know what? He might have had months to think about it and said, you know, I'm not going to, right, Hashem, no biggie, Hashem. I'm not going to hold it against you. But you're 100% right. We're going to get to that point also. Very good. Excellent. So that's our question. So, again, to summarize the question right now is, Tosfos, tzaddik gamor, what happened to love? Right? What happened to love? Okay, it's a nice question. Okay, and the second question that we are dealing with now is also, how far does the Gemara and Pesachim go? Do we apply to other mitzvahs? Does it apply just to tzedakah? Does it work in our everyday life? Are we all tzaddikim gemurim if we do things conditionally? That's also an overarching question. So perhaps, before we can answer this question, we're going to have to go quickly through a bunch of the sources that we have. We're going to have to just skip at some point to the last of the good stuff, the Musar part. But there's a more fundamental question on the Gemara, which is that the Gemara seems to be a violation of an Isser Midioraisa. There seems to be a Torah prohibition with somebody who does a mitzvah on condition that they get something in return. Why? So if you turn to the top of page 3, source number 3, what does it say there? Torah says, Lo tanasu es Hashem Elokeichem kasher nisisim b'masa. You shall not test Hashem, your God, as you tested him in Masa. What happened in Masa? The people wanted water, right? And they were so disappointed with the fact that Hashem provided water, but it was Mara, Masa, Mariva. It was called a place of bitterness, a place of anger, a place of resentment, that they actually uttered the words in Shemos, Vayikra Shem Makom Masa Mariva Ariv Bein Bnei Yisrael V'Anasosam Es Hashem, because of the machlokus the Bnei Yisrael had there, the resentment and anger that they had there. V'Anasosam Es Hashem, because they tested Hashem more. Hayesh Hashem B'Kerbeinu Imoyin, is Hashem in our midst or is He not? And says the Chumash in Devarim, to behave that way, right? To question Hashem at all and question His sovereignty and whether or not He actually does what He says He's going to do, is a violation of an Isser Midioraisa of Lo Tinasu Es Hashem Elokeichem. Now, to be fair, it's a machlokes rishon. You hear the question, right? The Gemara Pesachim should be problematic because we can't do anything to test Hashem. It's an Isser Midioraisa, right? To ever question Hashem. And why do you think it's an Isser Midioraisa to ever question Hashem? Why do you think it's an Isser Midioraisa?
Because that's lack of faith.
It's a lack of faith. And what might that lead to? Right, you might say, Hashem, this one mitzvah, right? I gave tzedakah and I thought I would, I thought this is going to be a return on my investment if I gave it tzedakah. You know what? I question Hashem here. And then what's going to happen in the next mitzvah? I say, well, it didn't work with tzedakah, so why should I do Why should I do this mitzvah? Why should I do that mitzvah? Why should I do any mitzvah, right? So that's a problem, right? It's actually a more, yes?
I think that you could have some doubt as long as you keep doing the mitzvah.
Excellent.
And also it
Good.
feels like in the Torah it's very often juxtaposed, like keep shmita, do
Yes.
maser, ani, and Hashem is gonna give a rest. Like it's right there.
You know, Ms. Cohn, to be honest, to be truthful with you, that was where I actually wanted to do this year. I wanted to ask all these questions, like Shiluach HaKain, and keep it up aim when the Torah says, Barach Liyam, and promise you long life. If Hashem doesn't want us to test us, then why set himself up for failure? That was what I wanted to give this year on. But I chose to take a different direction. Those are excellent questions, but I think maybe we'll answer them as a by the by. But that's really a discussion that I really have not fully. And I was looking at, beginning of Bechukosai, and actually I was going to put it on a source sheet, but I didn't. It's in my notes. Hashem makes a series of something like 40 promises that we'll do in Bechukosai Telech Walk by Mitzvos. 40 promises. That's crazy, right? If someone was sitting there with a checklist, trying to get all 40, and even a quarter of them were not, right? Or even, a few of them were not fulfilled, right? The person would say, Hashem, in b'chukosai telechu, right? Right? I don't have any produce. So that was my question. That's actually where I started from. That was something that bothered me. But we're not necessarily going to answer that question. That's a great question, right? So very good. So the truth is, in all fairness, it's not clear. It's machlokas rishonim what the isser of lo tenasi, what Hashem Elokeichem is. The smag and the smak, the first two sources, this is on page 3. Sefer Mitzvos Gedolos is the smag. Sefer Mitzvos Katanos is the smak. Morsnos Ramosha ben Yaakov of Kusi, and then it was made into a little bit more reader friendly, a little bit more shorter, a little abridged by a student of his, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Rabbi Yosef. And they both say as follows. They say like we said. That what's the problem? Just read the bold part. Shalo yomar adam esa mitzvazu ve'era emet barech. A person shouldn't say, I'm going to do this mitzvah, and I'm going to see if I'm going to get blessed. Right? The smag and the smak both say that. Rambam, however, it's not a problem for the Rambam, because the Rambam takes a bit of a different view. He says the problem was not with their questioning of Hashem, right? Lo lanaso says Hashem doesn't mean to question Hashem directly. It means to question the Navi who Hashem sends to perform the miracle, i.e. Moshe Rabbeinu. The Rambam says, Navi shenoda nevuaso v'hemino b'dvarav pam achar pam, a Navi who you know is truthful and he's come through time and again with everything he said has come true. O sheheyid lo Navi b'haya holech b'darchei hanavua, or someone where he testifies that he's a Navi and he walks in the ways of a proper Navi. Asar lachshev acharav u'laharher b'nevuaso shema eno emes. You can't test it. You can't ask him, show me another sign. Show me another sign. Give me another proof. Give me another proof. Walk on water, right? You can't do that. At a certain point, you have to just trust him. So for the Rambam, it's not a problem. But for the smag and the smak, who think that it's a problem to say, I'm going to do a mitzvah and test Hashem if he'll bless me on behalf, whether you do it implicitly, like the Gemara in Pesachim says, or explicitly, should be a problem. Because I really am a condition to it. The truth is also a third position that we're not going to read inside, but it's the opinion, if you turn to the next page, top of the next page, the Sefer Achinuch, who says a little bit of both. He says the real problem is really both. The problem is not to test a Navi a little bit more than necessary, because even a true Navi will eventually trip up, right? Something, or people will view of what he thinks is a miracle, or he thinks is the Nevuah of Hashem that came true. People say, it's not exactly how you said it. So if you keep on questioning a Navi, eventually you'll find something and that some people will begin to disbelieve. And that's going to lead to lack of faith in Hashem. But he's more of a middle position, but at least from the smag and the smak, as opposed to the Rambam, let's say, this seems to be a problem. So, yes?
I can understand one thing.
Yes?
How does the Torah want us to make a mitzvah? To say, even if you don't give me anything, I'll do it.
Oh, good.
I mean, is that how...
Yeah.
I mean, God gave us brain and gave us will and gave us...
Yes.
Yetzer hara, Yetzer tov. So you always have some kind of a, as a human being, I hope I daven good today, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu will listen to, give me whatever I need.
Yes.
Even if you don't say what it is,
Right.
He said, whatever I need, so you...
Yes. So good. So that's an excellent question. We're going to conclude with that, actually. But just for the interim, just when you get a chance, look at the Rashi and the Rabbeinu Yonah on the Mishnah, and they seem to think that it's Ahava Hashem is simply because you commanded me this mitzvah. That should be... Does it mean that all of us are violating Yisur when we have other things in mind? And we see that's how the Shut Be'er Mayim Chaim concludes about this fellow, right? Doesn't make him a bad person, but that's not the ideal. The ideal is that a person should do mitzvah simply because Hashem commanded it, right? And there's a lot to be said for that. We all heard stories about people, right? Like talking about Rosh Hashanah, right? The brisker Rav was very mocked, but when you hear the shofar and someone would cry, right? I think the Rav quotes it's the name of his father, Moshe Soloveitchik, that Moshe Soloveitchik, I don't remember if it was a Rav and his father, or Moshe and his father, Reb Chaim, they got emotional during Tikei Shofar, and he was chastised. I don't remember which one it was. They were chastised by their father because the mitzvah shofar doesn't evoke tears. Do you cry when you shake a lulav and esrog? Do you cry when you eat matzah? Right? The mitzvah is a mitzvah. You do because Hashem commanded you. That's a very high level. The question is for all of us, right? For me, right? I can't speak for anyone else in this room. Is that something we should aspire for? That we'll have to do with our conclusion. But that's an excellent, excellent point. Okay. So we're not going to do it now, but using these sources, we can actually answer for Tosfos. But we're not going to do that now. We're going to go take it one step further. And we're going to try to say something that will hopefully answer all of these questions with the 15 minutes we have left. Okay? And the question that we asked before is, can I apply the Gemara in Pesachim? So again, we have three questions that are overarching right now. Number one is Tosfos. What happened to love of Hashem? Why do you think that just not regretting things makes you a tzaddik Gamor? Second thing we asked was, does the Gemara in Pesachim apply to other mitzvos, right? And that would answer the question of our friend in the beginning, who does mitzvos and always says when he does a mitzvah, Hashem, do this for me, do that for me. And his friends are very worried that he's not doing mitzvos properly. And our third question is, it seems to be a violation of an Isser in the Torah of Lo Tanasu Hashem Lokechem, at least the way according to the Smag and the Sefer Chinuch, understand the mitzvah. So the question that we're going to go back to that we started with is, can we apply this to other mitzvos? So at first, if you look back at the Gemara, it would seem yes. What's the Gemara comparing? Which two mitzvos? I'm searching for chametz, and I want to find my needle, and as a proof that that's okay, that I'm not going to be harmed, I'm considered to be a shluchei mitzvah, it brings the case of tzedakah. It seems to be an equation between tzedakah and another mitzvah, b'dikas chametz. I don't think b'dikas chametz is any special, not to give everyone credit for doing it. But we don't think it's a special mitzvah. It's like any other mitzvah. But the truth is, says the Shaber Mayim Chaim, that b'dikas chametz, that case is different than tzedakah case. Why? Why is it different? Because when it comes to the person saying, I'm going to give tzedakah conditionally, what's he looking for? What's he anticipating? He's anticipating a long-term payout. Bishvil sheyichya b'ni o she'eya ben olam haba. So maybe tzedakah, right, will protect you in the long run, even when the mitzvah is finished. But when it comes to b'dikas chametz, maybe the protection only lasts in the interim, while I'm doing the mitzvah. So at first, again, we might want to equate tzedakah to all other mitzvos, but then we might say, you know what? Maybe it's different, because maybe most mitzvos, the benefit only lasts while I'm performing the mitzvah. But tzedakah somehow, that benefit pays out over generations. And this is actually rooted in the Gemara in Masechet Sotah. The Gemara says on the bottom of page 4, Darash Rabbi, everyone see that? In the Gemara in Sotah, Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. This is a very fascinating Gemara. Darash Rabbi Menachem bar Rabbi Yossi, Ner mitzvah b'Torah or. Mitzvos are referred to as candles, right? And Torah is referred to as a flame, as a burning flame. Tala hakasav es mitzvah b'ner b'Torah b'or. The Torah equates in Mishlei mitzvos to neros and Torah to flames. At a mitzvah b'ner lamar lecha. Why is a mitzvah compared to as a candle? Ma ner ena magina elafi sha'a. Just like a candle only lasts temporarily. Af mitzvah ena magina elafi sha'a. So to a mitzvah only lasts temporarily. V'es ha-Torah ba'or, but Torah is referred to as a burning fire. Lomar lecha ma or magin li'olam. Just like a flame will burn forever, right? Ma Torah, af Torah magin li'olam. So too, Torah will protect you forever. Va'omer, as it says in the pasuk, he quotes a pasuk in Malachi. He quotes a pasuk in Malachi. Betalechecha tanecha oscha. The pasuk says, when you walk with Hashem, it will guide you. What does that mean? Betalechecha tanecha oscha. Ze olam hazeh. Bischar tishmar alecha. But when you lie down, it will also guard over you. Zumisa. V'hakitzoso zo tisichecha. And when it says it will converse with you, this is referring to the world to come. Mashal la'adam shahaya mahalech bi'ishon layla va'afila. The comparison can be made to a person who's walking in the depths of darks. Umisyarem min akotzim min avtachim. He's afraid of thorns. He's afraid of holes in the ground. Min avarkanim umechayara'o min alistim. And from robbers and wild animals. Ve'eni yodei be'eza derech mahalech. He doesn't know which way to go. Nizdamen lo avuka shal or nitzol min akotzim. Right? The avuka, the flame, will save him from the thorns and from the thistles and from the holes. That's the mitzvah. It'll protect you from the the fears you have at that moment. Va'adayin misyari mechayara or minalistim. Ve'eno derech be'iza derech mahalech. But he doesn't know which way to go. Kevan sha'ala amad hashachar nitza mechayara minalistim. When morning comes, he's going to be saved from those things because those fears will no longer be in existence for him anymore. There won't be any holes in the ground. There won't be any wild animals anymore. That's Torah. It'll protect him even, right? Not only is it going to protect him from them, but it will remove them from his mitzias, from his reality. But he's still going to be lost, right? Torah might protect us and might remove things that might harm us. When you get to the crossroads, when you get to the world to come, then you'll be saved from everything. There'll be no more confusion. So we see from this Gemara, beautiful Gemara, is that mitzvos are like Nero, says the Gemara, a temporary flame. So for some reason, perhaps mitzvos, right? We can't do mitzvos conditionally because mitzvos, the payout is only while we do the mitzvah, as the Gemara says in Pesachim. Why is tzedakah different? So we're not going to belabor the point on this question, because I really want to get to the end before it ends in 10 minutes. But as a matter of fact, we know for a fact tzedakah is different. Because you know what the Gemara says in Maseches Tanis, and we're not going to see it inside, but let's refer to it outside, source number 5 on top of page 5. You know what you're allowed to say? The pasuk says, "Aser ta'aser." Give 1/10 of your grain to a Kadosh Baruch, to the poor person. End of the first line of the Gemara. Amarle mai aser ta'aser. Asked Rabbi Yochanan's nephew. He asked his uncle, "What does it say aser ta'aser in double language for?" Aser bishvil shetitaser. Give 1/10 in order that you become rich. Amarle manalacha. Amarle zil nasi. So the nephew asked his uncle Rabbi Yochanan, "How do you know this is true?" He said, "Go try it." Amarle said, "I could try that? I can try to give 1/10 of my grain to Hashem?" Amarle mishari, is that allowed? L'nusui lakadosh baruch hu, third line down in the Gemara on the top of page 5. Am I allowed to test Hashem? Am I allowed to give 1/10 of my grain and test Hashem if he's going to follow through? V'hak siv bal tenasu as Hashem, don't test Hashem. Amarle hachi amar Rav Oshia chutz mizu. This mitzvah is an exception, and he quotes a pasuk to prove it. So, incredible. So if perhaps tzedakah is different, you're actually allowed to test Hashem. So our question in the Gemara in Pesachim about testing Hashem might be that tzedakah is different. Now, again, we're not going to go into this whole point, but you might be happy to know that there is no mitzvah midiraisa, perhaps, of giving 1/10 of your money. This pasuk is talking about giving 1/10 of your grain. So it's a machlokas, Beis Yosef and Tur, if this even applies to giving 1/10 of your grain, or only 1/10 of your money. And there are, as you can imagine, there are many opinions on this. The Tur says it even applies if you give 1/10 of your money. Tosfos on that Gemara actually says aser taser, call to us. Why the word call? Give all your grain, because it comes to include not just your grain but even your money. Whereas the Beis Yosef say no, it only applies to meiser, to giving grain, meiser tefua, not meiser ksafim, 1/10 of your grain. So it's a machlokas. And even if you assume that, and there's even an opinion by the Aruch HaShulchan that says it's not even a mitzvah to give 1/10 of your money. It's just an hagatova. It's a nice idea. So before we get all excited, and this is like the investment strategy that no one's ever heard of before, it's not so clear it works unless you're giving 1/10 of your grain. But what it does tell us is that, at least according to those opinions that equate this Gemara with the Gemara in Pesachim, is that by tzedakah, assuming giving 1/10 of your grain is an analogy for all of tzedakah, you're allowed to attest Hashem when it comes to tzedakah based on a pasuk, because then Hashem will pay out. Now, we don't know what Hashem will pay out means, right? Ezehu Ashir, right? So we don't know, right? There's many things going on in this world we just don't know. What does wealth mean? Does wealth mean my paycheck will be bigger? Does wealth mean I'll have money in the bank account? Does wealth mean that I will find wealth in other areas of my life? We don't know. But for some reason, tzedakah seems to be an exception, assuming, or it might just be meiser. And for this reason, just to conclude the first part of our shir, and we have 5 minutes left, says the Shut Be'er Mayim Chaim. Right? Not only is it might be a violation of the Torah to do mitzvos on condition of lo tenasu as Hashem Elokecha. It might only apply to meiser tevua, to your grain. And even if it applies to meiser tevua, we all know that giving 1/10 of your grain nowadays is only a din d'Rabbanan. So who's to say that a mitzvah mid'Rabbanan can override a din d'Oraisa? So he says, for that reason you shouldn't test Hashem. But he says, and he comes back to Tosfos' question. He says, I'm not telling you what you're doing is wrong. Let's go back to what Tosfos said. And he says as follows. Again, we're going through, and by the way, why is tzedakah an exception? We're not going to go through it inside, but it's a Mishnah we see every morning in davening, right? Elu dvarim, it says on page 5, source 6. Elu dvarim, these are the things, she'ein lehem shir b'olam haba, right? Hapeya b'bikurim b'arayon, gemilas chasadim b'talmud Torah. There's no way to measure how great these things are in the world to come. V'karen kayames l'olam haba, right? There's no shear in this world, and a karen kamas olam haba. So Rambam points out what's gemilas chasadim includes tzedakah. So the Mishnah itself promises us a reward in olam hazeh and olam haba for gemilas chasadim. The Rambam says it even includes tzedakah. And we can imagine why tzedakah might be the exception. If you give to your fellow man, right? So I can understand why Kadosh Baruch Hu might make sure that I receive some sort of compensation in this world, because tzedakah you can't do in the world to come, right? So I need to know that, right? Hashem says this is such a serious matter that I'm going to reward you here. But let's go back to our question with Tosfos, right? Our question with Tosfos was, what does Tosfos mean when he says just not regretting something makes you a tzaddik gamor? So the Shut Be'er Mayim Chaim gives a fabulous answer, and I'm going to prove it based on other sources very quickly. He says as follows. He says there's a difference between anticipating a reward and then regretting that award. That's usher. That's against the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. But that's not the same thing as anticipating a reward at all. Like you were saying, I think. The difference between doing a mitzvah and saying, I want a reward for it, and if I'm toa u'mischaretz, that's an avera. But it doesn't mean that I do a mitzvah, I should assume that no one's watching at all. I know that my mitzvahs count, and that's okay, and it's not a problem with that, he says. What's the difference? The first one, when it comes to regret, says the Shut Be'er Mayim Chaim, is a problem of testing Hashem. A test is conditional. Hashem, if you prove that you can do X, then I'll do Z. But just anticipating that one's actions are meaningful and being recorded and banked by Hashem in some sort of accounting book up in Shemayim does not make his avodas Hashem conditional. Just because you anticipate that Hashem doesn't forget what you've done, the Ma'asim Tovim you've done in this world, and the mitzvahs you've done, does not make your mitzvahs conditional. Just the fact that you have a kavanah that Hashem pays attention to everything that takes place. So our friend, he says, is okay. Maybe Avas Hashem, if you're a real tzaddik, and you can get to that level and never think about anything like the Brisker Rav except for the Kol Shofar, then maybe that's ideal. But for the rest of us, says the Be'er Mayim Chaim, as long as you don't resent it, there's nothing wrong with thinking that everything is being recorded by a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And to prove this, I want to show you quickly with the last 2 minutes we have left, based on a bunch of things I want to show, but I'm just going to show you 2 things because I can't show you everything. I want to show you something fascinating that I never noticed before. Look back at the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, and the Rambam gives us a fascinating history. The Rambam on his Perush Mishnayos, and Rashi pointed out, and it's based on one of the Masechtos Katanos, I think Derech Eretz Zutra, I think, or Avos Rabbi Nassan, I'm not sure. On page number 2, look at this. Antigonus used to say the following: don't serve Hashem for rewards. Serve Hashem, right? Shalom anas l'kabel pras, not for rewards. Look at this paragraph over here. V'hayu lezeh chacham shnei talmidim. Antigonus had 2 students. You might recognize their names. Shem echad Tzadok v'shem echad Baitus. One's name was Tzadok and one's name was Baitus. V'ka'asher shamuhu sha'amar zeh hamaymer. When they used to hear their Rebbe say day in and day out, Hashem don't do mitzvahs for rewards, don't do mitzvahs for rewards. Yatzum l'fna. They left the Beis Medrash. V'amar echad mehem l'sheni. And they said to each other, Hine haral kvar be'er perish she'ein lo schar b'onesh. Our Rebbe told us there's no schar b'onesh. There is no reward and punishment in this world. That's what our Rebbe tells us every single day. Ve'ein shein tikva klal. There is no hope. Life is meaningless. Kilo havinu kavanas alav Hashem. They did not understand what the Rebbe meant. They misconstrued his words. V'nischabru zeh lezeh. And they said, we have to create a no form of the religion. Uparshu min Torah. They left the path of Torah. V'tkabsa lezeh kat lezeh. They formed their own stream of Judaism, a bastardized view of Judaism. Yikru hachacham Sadukim and Baitusim, and the Chachamim called their stream of Judaism called Sadukim and Baitusim. They were kofrim be'ikr. They denied the Torah Shebaal Peh. V'yoshelo yachol lekabetz kilos, but no one wanted to listen to them. Nobody wanted to learn from these people because they knew they were off the wall. They wandered off the reservation. L'fnei mashe giu lehem min ha'amuna, because they were non-believers. Kizos ha'amuna hara ha'parid ha'mitzkabsim. Kol shekain shalotik beis nifradim. They certainly couldn't bring people in with their anger. So halchu achar emos hadavar shelo yuchlu lahachriz etzel hamon. They needed to come up with a new message. They needed to rebrand themselves. They went to a consultant. You know what they did? V'lo hitzu et mipiem hayu nehargim. And they knew that if they said this, they would be killed. So they said as follows: Soni lamar nusach haTorah v'tzir kol echad mehem belibus yata shehu ma'amid b'nusach haTorah. We believe in the Torah shebechsav. They changed their message. V'cholek ala Kabbalah. The only thing we disagree with is on Torah Shebaal Peh. V'shaya Kabbalah built in Achona, but they had a misguided message of what Torah Shebaal Peh was. And you could read the rest of it. And he says, what happened to Baitus? If you don't believe that things matter at all, then you become Sedukim and Baitusim. That is not what the Torah tells us. We believe, especially during this time of year, that you're right, we should all serve Hashem for Abbas Hashem and for nothing else. But to think that things don't matter, right? The Ram Tosfos says, don't regret it. Okay, don't regret it. But does that mean you can't have anything in mind when you do a mitzvah at all? You know what the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos tells us? Again, with Mishnah that we are all familiar with, but it's important to remind ourselves of this Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? The last source on page number 6. Rabbi Omer Ezehu Derech Yeshara Sheyavor Lo Adam Kol Shi Teferes Oso Teferes Min Adam. Do things that are benefit to yourself and the benefit to Hashem. V'abizar b'mitzvah kala b'chamura. Treat all mitzvos equally. That's what we're talking about. Don't do mitzvos conditionally. But, says the Mishnah, because you don't know which mitzvahs count. You think you're doing it and Hashem is paying attention and He doesn't have what you have in mind. But listen to what the Mishnah concludes with. But if you really want to know what you have to keep in mind, know what's above you. Iyun roa, an eye that sees. V'ozen shema'as, and an ear that hears. V'kol masach v'sefer, all your mitzvahs. Everything's written in a sefer by Hashem. Of course, al matan scharam, don't weigh mitzvahs against each other. But does that mean that you shouldn't pay attention? Oh, Hashem doesn't know it all. And I want to show you something that I never realized before. And I'm talking fast because the time's going down and you're going to be upset at me if we go late. But I never realized. Do you know that there's a source in the Torah there's a principle we're all familiar with. I have 3 Gemaras and a Tosfos on this. 2 Tosfos said we're not going to go into it. The concept of mitoch shelo lishma bo lishma. That it's better to do mitzvot shelo lishma even if it's not the right reason, because mitoch shelo lishma bo lishma. As long as you do mitzvot shelo lishma, eventually you do it lishma. And I always assumed what I think most people assume, that you do mitzvot shelo lishma, and eventually it'll lead to bo lishma. You know what? I don't believe in Shabbos. I don't enjoy Shabbos at all. But I keep Shabbos day in and day out. Eventually I'll be invited to someone's house. They'll show me the beauty of Shabbos. I'll find a Rabbi. I'll find a Morah. I'll find someone who'll tell me what the beauty of this mitzvah is. And I'll start doing it for real. I can't stand matzah. And I'll eat it every Pesach. And eventually I'll begin to like the taste. I'll understand why matzah is important. That's what I always thought. Shemitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. But it can't be the only thing the Gemara teaches us. You know how I know that? Who is the source in Tanakh for mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma? That you do things shelo lishma and it will lead to doing them l'shem Hashem. That's what lishma means. L'shem Hey Hashem. What's that? No. Yisro was a good guy. He was a bad guy. A bad guy. Look at source 8. Until we read Parshas Korach this summer, I never knew this before. What?
Bilam, right?
I'm sorry, Bilam. I'm sorry, not Bilam. Balak. I'm sorry, not Korach. Right. Bilam, another bad guy. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Li'olam yasok adam b'torah u'v'mitzvah. A person should always engage in Torah and mitzvah. So even if he doesn't have the right reasons for doing it, source number 8. Shemitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. Because even if he does it for the wrong reasons, it'll lead to the right reasons. That's what I thought you read it. Look what the Gemara says. Shebischar arbayim b'shtayim karbana shikre balak. In the merit of the 42 sacrifices that Balak brought, zacha v'yatsa mimenu rus. He was zocha to have rus. Does that mean that because Bilam brought karbanos, eventually he would do karbanos for L'Shem Hashem? That's not what the Gemara says. It says that Bilam did something in one generation, and years and years and years later, that mitzvah paid dividends. It doesn't mean that because Yisro brought 42 karbanos, eventually he'll bring a carbon for Hashem. That's not what it says. It says mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma doesn't mean that. It says mitoch shelo lishma, even if things are not done for the right reasons necessarily, ba lishma. Every mitzvah will have a positive outcome. Every mitzvah will do something beneficial, if not for you, then someone else in the world. If not for someone else in the world, then for somebody else in the future, a descendant of yours. And therefore, that's what the message of this is. The Gemara in Pesachim is telling us that someone gives them tzedakah. And say, B'shvil sheyichye b'ni, o sheyeh ben olam haba. Look what the Gemara says. I'm not making it up. So that my child shall live. I don't know what yichye b'ni means. Does it mean that my child will be healed? It could mean that. If you want to be a little drushy here, it means sheyichye b'ni. My children should live. I thought of that. I don't know if it's true. O sheyeh ben olam haba. Now, I'm not making up. The Gemara says that. Or that my mitzvah should pay dividends in the future. Zeh tzadik gamor. You know why you're at tzadik gamor? Because you are living by the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, which tells you that a person always has to know 3 things. Dam alamala mimcha, know what's above you, ayin roa, an eye that sees, ozen shamas, ear the ear hears, b'kol ma'asecha b'sefer nechtavim. And if we all remember that b'kol ma'asecha b'sefer nechtavim, we will Hashem be nichtav b'sifrei tzadikim for a gemar tov and for a good year.